Hi, good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC with me, Almond. Here's a look at tonight's top stories. John Lee says Hong Kong has met the requirements for the mainland border to be reopened. An RTHK union wins a partial victory in a judicial review over the headliner show. And fingers are pointed after dozens of migrants drown in a bid to reach England from France. Chief Secretary John Lee says the Hong Kong government will press ahead with the final preparations to reopen the border with the mainland. Lee was speaking at the conclusion of a meeting with mainland officials in Shenzhen today. He confirmed that mainland officials are satisfied with the SAR's anti-epidemic measures after their 4-day visit earlier this week. Hong Kong has basically met the requirements to resume cross-border travel, Lee added. A Hong Kong version of the mainland's health code will be rolled out soon, and anyone wishing to travel quarantine-free must adopt the tracing system. The High Court has ruled partially in favor of an RTHK workers' union in a judicial review against allegations that the headliner show breached the TV program code. The satirical program, which has been axed after more than 3 decades, was accused of insulting police.
In February last year, a headliner episode mocked police, saying they had more personal protective equipment than health workers during the COVID pandemic. Another segment showed an actor in police uniform popping from a rubbish bin. The force complained that it had been insulted by the public broadcaster, which it accused of spreading misinformation. The Communications Authority then ruled that RTHK had breached the TV program code by failure to ensure accuracy, denigrating police, and failing to present a broad range of views, including that of the force. The RTHK Staff Union and the Hong Kong Journalists Association launched a judicial challenge to quash the ruling. They said satires should have a lower threshold for accuracy, adding the ruling restricted freedom of expression. High Court Judge Anderson Chow today said the Communications Authority made an error of principle when it ruled that RTHK failed to ensure accuracy by depicting police having more protective equipment than medics. Chow said RTHK not being able to justify the statement doesn't mean the evidence is false in nature. Chow also quashed the ruling that different views were not presented. He pointed out that RTHK's 2 invitations to police to respond were declined or ignored. The judge, though, rejected the union's claim that the rulings infringed the rights to freedom of expression. Chow said Headliner was a TV program, not a legal person, and therefore doesn't have such legal rights. He added RTHK is a government department and cannot be equated to the staff working there as a legal person. That means the broadcaster is not entitled to the legal rights of freedom of expression. RTHK suspended Headliner in June last year, 31 years after it was first aired.
Police have warned foreign domestic helpers not to let other people gain access to their bank accounts in exchange for a few $1,000s. This comes as a large number of helpers were unwittingly involved in money laundering cases. Johanna Chan reports.
Foreign domestic helpers often use social media and gather together on their days off. The Police Financial Intelligence and Investigation Bureau says crime syndicates exploit the 2 activities to gain access to the helpers' bank accounts in exchange for cash.
Throughout our investigation, some of them were approached through the social media, and also sometimes they were approached by some stranger on their off day on the streets.
Police pointed out that $1,000 to $2,000 is quite enticing for some, and helpers may be committing crimes unknowingly. In 2 anti-money laundering operations in June and July, police arrested 43 people, 34 of whom were domestic helpers. The sum involved totaled $39 million.
Hong Kong citizens have already alerted that they cannot just borrow or let their bank account to others. Maybe that's why the syndicate have approached to different race of people to obtain their student account. And that's why we have now noticed this trend, and also we have made some notice and liaise with the consulate to do some more publicity.
Police caught and prosecuted 661 people for money laundering in the first 9 months this year, triple the number for the same period last year. Those found guilty could be fined a maximum of $5 million and jailed for up to 14 years. Johanna Chan, HKIBC.
Polytechnic University has celebrated its 85th anniversary as an educational institution, with the chairman of its council thanking the government for helping to restore stability on the campus after protests 2 years ago.
Not only our campus was severely damaged, the incident also brought misunderstanding and created negative impact on the PolyU. With the support of the government and our PolyU people, we restored stability and order from the chaos within short time. We are very grateful that all these misunderstandings were proved wrong finally. PolyU does not forget the original mission, and we remain steadfast on our direction.
Lam's remarks came days after the second anniversary of a siege of the campus by anti-government protesters. Hundreds were injured and thousands arrested. PolyU, which was granted university status in 1994, has started national security law courses. Chief Executive Carrie Lam has addressed several issues in her first online seminar for teachers. She had promised earlier to instruct them on how to conduct the Citizenship and Social Development course, which will replace liberal studies. During the hour-long session, Lam touched on history, the special administrative region, and her role as chief executive. The forum ended with a question-and-answer session. The subject that replaces liberal studies will cover Hong Kong, its connection with the mainland, and national security. Turning overseas, a boat carrying migrants has capsized in the English Channel, drowning dozens, including pregnant women and children. While gangsters have been blamed for organizing the dangerous voyage, the calamity threatens to drive a new wedge between Channel neighbors Britain and France. Wenna Wong explains.
Activists gathered outside the port of Calais in northern France after at least 31 migrants died in nearby waters. Carrying placards, they chanted, "Human rights, outraged, smashed, martyred." The migrants had been trying to reach Britain from France when their inflatable dinghy capsized in freezing waters. Only 2 survived. The tragedy threatens to escalate tensions between France and Britain, already at odds over fishing rights and Brexit. In a telephone conversation, French President Emmanuel Macron told British Prime Minister Boris Johnson that their countries have a shared responsibility. He also warned Johnson not to exploit the disaster for political purposes. The British leader in turn accused France of not patrolling its beaches properly. French Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin said while there is always a sense of responsibility, criminals who orchestrated the trafficking should shoulder most of the blame. The sentiment was echoed by Johnson.
I also want to say that this disaster underscores how dangerous it is to cross the Channel in this way. And it also shows how vital it is that we now step up our efforts to break the business model of the gangsters who are sending people to sea in this way.
The Channel tragedy has again highlighted the plight of migrants trying to flee war, poverty, corruption, and violence. Increasingly desperate and often with young children in tow, families are choosing to risk harsh conditions over the dangers at home. Earlier this month, the world witnessed the suffering of thousands of migrants from the Middle East as they endured harsh conditions on the border between Belarus and Poland in their bid to reach Germany. Wenna Wong, HKIBC.
The head of a British charity which supports refugees says tough national policies forced migrants to seek alternative but dangerous ways to enter borders.
You don't put your family and yourself in a boat in the busy shipping lane in the world unless you're desperate. Of course, they're being exploited. But what we also know, and the government themselves have acknowledged this, is that the tougher the policies, the better for the business model of the smugglers it is. The Prime Minister said yesterday, we need to show that the business model doesn't work. The reality is that every time they talk tough and create tough new policies, the business model works more effectively.
Protesters in the Solomon Islands are reported to have targeted Chinese-owned businesses in the capital, Honiara. As some buildings were set ablaze, Australia announced that it is sending more than 100 police and soldiers to restore order in the Pacific Island nation. Canberra said the deployment was at the request of the Solomons Prime Minister and isn't an interference in its internal affairs. Most of the protesters are believed to be opposed to the government's decision 2 years ago to sever diplomatic ties with Taiwan and recognize China. And coming up after the break. 3 white men are convicted of killing a black jogger in the U.S. state of Georgia. And an old reservoir in Shemshui Po is set to greet visitors after a facelift.